This video is to help you in doing part 2 of the History 231 research trail assignment using the International Medieval Bibliography, which I will refer to as the IMB throughout this video. The IMB can be accessed at the UNBC library website. In order to be able to access this source, however, you'll either have to be on campus or you'll have to log into your library account. So to access it, you go to the home page of the library, click on Databases, and then find the International Medieval Bibliography and click Connect. So when you get to the IMB, this is what your search page is going to look like. And this is a very broad search page, which can be helpful in some ways, but also very overwhelming. So I would suggest that you go to advanced search instead. And you'll see here that it gives you a lot more categories to help narrow your search down. So you can still do your broad general keywords, but you can also choose languages, geographical areas, and centuries. So for our purposes, again, our topic is peasant society. So I'm going to type in peasant society into the free search section. And although I read a number of different languages, most of you will only be able to do English, so I would suggest that you limit your search to English. And so you'll see here that it indicates that there's 52 hits on peasant society in English. So you can start off if you want by looking at what that yields for you. And so there's many different topics that you can potentially look at. You'll see here that there's a variety of different articles that have been published, the most recent from 2013, and the oldest going back to 1973. So remember that for the purposes of this assignment, you need to choose sources only that were published after 1970. And ideally choose ones that were published within the last 10 years, depending upon the particular topic. So there's lots and lots of different potential sources that I have here that I could use. So how am I going to limit it to get stuff that's interesting and useful for my topic? Well, if we go back to our primary sources, you remember that our primary sources are both from the 13th century, and both of them were from England. So if I type in peasant society again, and then limit the language to English, the geographical area, you'll see here that you can choose specific areas, or you can click on that area and it allows you to choose particular aspects of that broader area. But for my purpose, I'm just going to choose the British Isles, and then you'll note here that that has narrowed my hits down to 22. So this is another way that I can limit the sources, and it gives me a bit more focused of a way of searching for particular things that I'm interested in. So one of the things that came up when we were looking at the primary sources that I chose for my paper looking on peasant society was the discussion of marriages and having to pay a fine to get married or get a license to marry. So here's an article that looks at peasant marriages and families in late medieval England, and my sources are from the 13th century, so that can be considered the late medieval period. So let's click on that and see what I find here. So here's an article by Judith Bennett, and it gives me a brief description about what it's about, and the book that it comes in, Medieval Families, Perspectives on Marriage, but it also indicates that this was originally published in the Journal of Interdisciplinary History in 1984. So it's a bit older of an article, but it still could be useful. And then it also gives me some information here about courts of law, manorial courts, the different subjects that this particular article discusses. And it's from the 14th century, so a little bit later than the time period that I'm looking at, but it still could be useful. And it talks about this couple and the various social networks that they had. So that might be kind of interesting for me to look at. So let's go back and see what else I have. Some of these here are on other things around population pressure, peasant discontent, peasant society, as revealed through a 13th century manorial extent, so that might be kind of interesting, but it's also older, from 1980. It comes from the journal Comitatus, but it focuses on the use of manorial materials, which is what the primary sources that I found were from, so that might also be useful for me. Now I can go back to the advanced search and try and reshape my search to fit a bit more with the type of things that I'm interested in. So one way I can sort of open or focus in particularly on peasant marriages is I can just type in peasant marriages. Now that indicates that there are 8 articles on that topic. So I can go search here. Now here we have one on peasant women agency and status in mid-13th to late 14th century England, some reconsideration. So that might be useful for me. That also looks at England, again a bit of a later time period, but that's okay. It's in this book here called Married Women in the Law in Pre-Modern Northwest Europe. It's an article in that book there, so it gives me the information on where I can find that book, and then also gives me some of the various search categories that I can have. So that also might be a good article for me. It also indicates that it covers the 13th and 14th centuries, so that is all the time period that I'm looking at as well. Now another way that you can search is using the particular categories that the IMB has laid out. So if I type in peasant and just kind of click on it, you'll see that it gives me a number of different categories here. So peasants and daily life, that's sort of related to social history here. So here I have, it gives me 8 different hits as well. Now some of these are not in English, so I didn't click on the English one. But here's a medieval peasant at home, so that could be kind of useful for me. And again, here's gives me a brief idea about what it's about, as well as the type of sources that it uses, so that's pretty useful. And then it also tells me the book that it's in, and where I can find it. This is a very broad article, looks at the 13th to the 16th century, and it uses wills as a variety of other documents, and it focuses on the British Isles. So this might be a useful source for me to use for my particular topic. The IMB will allow you to do as many searches as you want, and you can use a variety of different topics from broad to very focused ones. Just one note, if you are going to use the drop-down menu to see how they've categorized things, you can click Next, which will allow you to continue to page through what they have in those various areas. So you can look geographically. As you can see, there's various thematic ways of searching. So these will all kind of help you to limit your project. Remember that you don't have to look only at a specific area. You can look comparatively. And so if you want to think about peasants in a variety of different areas, we could do the British Isles, and then I can also click on and that allows me to choose somewhere else as well. So I could pick, let's look comparatively at peasants in the British Isles and Iberia. I'm going to click Close. I'm going to ask that I only get articles in English. So there's no articles that write about the British Isles and Iberia together. So I might want to switch that to or, because then it allows me to look at either of those areas. Okay, so now there's 119 different articles that look at Iberia or the British Isles. And then I can go through and look at these different categories. Remember that you do want to choose material that was published more recently if possible, and no later than 1970. For part of your assignment on this, you will need to look at the classification detail, so that is this section here, and you will need to include that in your assignments. Now one last thing, when you are now searching for these particular articles in our database, you are going to use this title of the publication to look for it, to see if UNBC has that particular journal title or that particular book collection. So that's a journal title. Let's do our Peasant Society one more time to see if we can find something that's published in a book. Okay, the Agrarian Problem. So this is the book. So this is the book title that you would look for here. Remember that we may not have all of these books at the UNBC library, and that you do need to find either a journal article or a book collection through our interlibrary loan, and that is another part of this another section of this part of the library assignment.